Johnny Carson was the king of late night. He had everything. At the time of his death, he left behind a massive fortune of $300 million. But that incredible number is not a story of success. It is a story of pain. Why did this staggering amount of money, a fortune built over 30 years, end up making his family cry? The answer is a dark and tragic story, hidden behind the curtains of the famous show. When you are the king, you get paid like a king. Johnny Carson was not just a TV host. He was an American institution, and he made sure he was paid for it. It is hard to understand just how much money he was making. At his absolute peak, Johnny Carson earned an annual income of $25 million. That was in the early 1990s. If you adjust that for today, it would be like one man making $55 million, or even $57 million, every single year. But he was earning huge money long before that. Back in the mid-1970s, Carson was already the highest-paid person on television. He was making $4 million a year. That was a number that most people could not even imagine. This money was his power. NBC knew that he was a prized commodity. He was the one who could bring in celebrities and normal people, and everyone watched. He hosted The Tonight Show from 1962 to 1992. For 30 years, he was a part of American life, and his $300 million net worth at the time of his death was proof of his incredible success. But how does one man make that much money? Johnny Carson was not just an employee, he was an owner. For the first part of his career, he was the star of The Tonight Show. But in 1980, he made a move that changed everything. He sat down with the bosses at NBC and negotiated a new contract. This was not just a raise. He was already making millions. This was about control. The new deal gave his own company, Carson Productions, ownership of The Tonight Show. Think about that. The network did not even own its biggest show. Johnny Carson did, but he did not stop there. The 1980 deal also gave him control over the time slot that came on right after his show. He had the authority to decide what would be on TV at 12:30 at night, and he used that power to create a whole new show. That show was Late Night with David Letterman. His company, Carson Productions, co-produced David Letterman's show from 1982 to 1993. He was the kingmaker. He was getting paid as the host of the biggest television show, and he was getting paid as the owner of the two biggest shows on television. Carson Productions became a real power player. It did not just make TV shows. It also produced movies like the famous 1983 film The Big Chill. This was the real source of his $300 million fortune. His salary was huge, but his ownership was everything. Johnny Carson was a man who needed to be in control. We saw it on his show. He was always in control. He was comfortable in front of an audience because he was in charge. But as we will see, he could not control his personal life. And what does a man with $300 million and total control over late-night television buy? He buys a fortress. Johnny Carson was a very private man. He did not like the public to see his real life. He once said he was shy. He was not comfortable with people. So he used his millions to build walls around himself. Beautiful, expensive walls. His most famous home was a massive estate in Malibu, California. It sat on 4 acres of land on a cliff in Point Dume. It was private and secluded, designed to keep the world out. Carson bought it in the mid-1980s for $9.5 million. It was designed by a famous architect named Edward R. Niles. The main house was a dramatic modern building. It was made of glass and wood triangles. It did not look warm or comfortable. It looked like a piece of art. Inside, the house was just as strange and beautiful. The center of the home was an indoor arboretum, a garden growing inside the house. It had a 30-foot glass ceiling. There was a sunken fireplace made of copper and glass. From the giant glass walls, you could see the Pacific Ocean. This was his fortress. He lived there until he died. After his death, his widow, Alexis, sold the property. In 2007, she sold it for $46 million. Today, that same Malibu estate is on the market for an astounding $110 million. But he did not just have the glass fortress in Malibu. He also owned property in New York. Before he moved his show to California, he lived in a suburb of New York City. That home just hit the market for $5.3 million, and it has a very strange nickname. The locals still call it the Carson Ball Field. Why? Because Johnny Carson, the very private and distant star, would let the local kids play baseball in his yard. This one small fact tells you everything. He let children he did not even know play on his property. It was a kind and generous thing to do, but as we will soon find out, he was not nearly as generous with his own family. His money also bought him expensive and dramatic toys. Carson was a huge car fan. He loved the famous DeLorean DMC-12. That is the car with the gull-wing doors, made famous in the Back to the Future movies. Carson was not just a fan. He was a major investor. He gave $500,000 to the DeLorean Motor Company. Because he was an investor, he was gifted 2 of the cars. But these cars were a disaster. They were a perfect symbol of his life, shiny on the outside, but full of drama. Jay Leno tells a story about Carson's very first drive in his new DeLorean. The car's battery died on the highway, and when the battery died, the door locks would not work. He was trapped inside his own car. The second DeLorean brought even more drama. In 1982, Carson was pulled over while driving it. He had been drinking wine at his favorite restaurant. He was arrested for drunk driving. This was a crack in his perfect, clean image. He built a glass palace to keep the world out. His life was filled with expensive, dramatic toys. But the problem with a life that big is that the breakups are just as big, and they cost a fortune. Johnny Carson's life was not stable. He was married 4 times. His many marriages were even a running joke on his own show. His friend, the famous comedian Lucille Ball, once joked with him on the air, "You get married a lot." But it was not a joke. It was a huge financial problem. His first marriage to Jody Morrill Wolcott ended in 1963. They had 3 sons together. That divorce was messy and painful. His second marriage to Joanne Copeland also ended in divorce, but it was his third marriage that cost him the most. In 1972, he married a model named Joanna Holland. They were married for 12 years. When they divorced in 1985, it was one of the most expensive divorces in history. The settlement cost Johnny Carson an estimated $20 million. That was in one S985. In today's money, that would be $48 million. Some reports say it was as high as $58 million. He had to pay $20 million in cash and property. This was the first time his family life had cost him part of his fortune. How can a man so smart, so rich, and so in control keep failing? He was a brilliant businessman, but he was terrible at his personal life. To understand the $300 million man, you have to understand the boy. You have to understand his mother. Johnny Carson was a cold man. He was distant. His own friends said he was hard to know, and he knew where that coldness came from. He once said, "I don't have much of a talent for happiness." My mother saw to that. His relationship with his mother, Ruth Carson, was the key to his whole life. It was strained and complicated. Friends who knew them said she was cold and domineering. She was his toughest critic. Nothing her son did was ever good enough. There are so many stories about her. Johnny's lawyer, Henry Bushkin, told a story about a trip he bought for his parents. He sent them on an all-expenses-paid tour of Europe. When they got back, Johnny called his mother. He asked her about the trip. What were the highlights? Her answer was 5 words. "It's good to be home." Another time, he sent her a beautiful mink coat. He was rich, and he wanted to give his mother nice things. She sent it right back to him. She said it was too fancy for Nebraska. But the most famous story happened with a reporter. A reporter from Time magazine was writing a cover story on Johnny. He sat with Ruth Carson as she watched her son's monologue on TV. When Johnny finished his jokes, Ruth turned to the reporter. She said, "That wasn't funny." Then she got up and left the room. No matter how famous he got, he could not win her approval. He was the biggest star in the world, but his own mother would not say well done. This relationship scarred him. When Ruth Carson died in 1985, Johnny's reaction was short and shocking. He said, "The wicked witch is dead." It seems like a simple story. A cold mother creates a cold son. But there is one last heartbreaking twist. After Ruth died, workers were cleaning out her home in Arizona. They found a large box. Inside that box were hundreds of newspaper and magazine clippings. Every article, every photo, every accomplishment from Johnny's entire career. She had saved all of it, going all the way back to the beginning. She was proud of him. She was just never able to tell him. Johnny took that box, and he kept it in his bedroom closet for the rest of his life. That coldness from his mother shaped him. It is what made him a star. Johnny Carson was an intensely shy person. His friend, comedian Dick Cavett, said Johnny was so socially uncomfortable. He said it was hard for Johnny to even talk to fans. But he found an escape. When he was just 12 years old, he bought a mail-order magician's kit. He fell in love with magic. He practiced his card tricks on his family members. His mother, Ruth, made him a cape. This shy, awkward boy found that when he was on a stage, he was a different person. At age 14, he had his first performance. He called himself the Great Carson. He was paid $3 a show. This was the beginning of everything. The shy boy who could not talk to people could be the Great Carson, who was charming and in control. This is what he did his entire life. The man on television was not really Johnny Carson. It was a character. It was a performance. Even one of his most famous characters on The Tonight Show, Karnak the Magnificent, came from his childhood as a magician. He learned as a boy that he could get applause from strangers. It was easier than getting love from his own family. He was a huge success as an entertainer, but he was a failure as a husband, and he was about to become a failure as a father. He never got the love he wanted from his mother, and that coldness, that inability to show love, was a darkness he passed right on to his own children. Johnny Carson had 3 sons with his first wife, Jody. Their names were Christopher, Rick, and Corey. When Johnny and Jody got divorced, the boys were young. They ended up living with Johnny and his new wives. They became distant from their own mother. But living with Johnny was not easy. He was a distant, cold father. He was the same way with his sons as his mother had been with him. His youngest son, Corey Carson, explained the pain of being his child. Corey said, "Work was easy for him. Family was not." Corey said that his father was perfect for his job. He was the right man at the right time. But to get that success, he left his kids and family as a consequence. Corey said his father made life most difficult for those left to watch the magic unfold, without the benefit of experiencing it with him. They were just like the audience. They were watching him on TV. Corey shared one truly painful memory. He said it was hard to watch his dad on The Tonight Show, because sometimes his father would have little children on as guests, and Johnny would be so warm and so funny with them. He would be absolutely enthralled with their every word. Corey would watch this and think, what did they have that we didn't? 10 minutes of material. Do you remember the story about the Carson ball field? The home where he let local kids play baseball in his yard? He could be a perfect father figure to strangers. He could be a loving dad to child actors on his show for 10 minutes. But he could not do it for his own sons. Imagine that. Watching your own father on TV, giving the love you desperately wanted to other children. This was the life of the Carson boys, a life of watching the magic from a distance. But that distance would soon be filled with a terrible tragedy. On June 21, 1991, Johnny's middle son, Rick Carson, was driving near the beach in California. He was 39 years old. Rick lost control of his car. His car plunged more than 100 feet down an embankment. He was killed in the crash. The death of his son hit Johnny hard. It was a horrible, senseless tragedy, and it was the one thing that finally broke through his cold walls. The man who was so distant, so private, and so unable to show his feelings was finally broken. We know this because his lawyer, Henry Bushkin, was there. He wrote about what happened next. Sometime after Rick's death, Johnny Carson did something shocking. He apologized. He sat down with his 2 surviving sons, Chris and Corey, and he told them he was sorry. He apologized for not being there when they needed him. It took the most horrible thing a father can imagine, the death of his son, to finally say he was sorry. It was a crack in the fortress, a moment of real human connection. But it was too little, and it was too late. And while his surviving sons got a late apology, there was one member of his family who would get nothing at all. This is the darkest part of the Carson family story. This is the part that truly makes you cry. Johnny's oldest son, Chris Carson, lived in Florida. In the 1980s, he was in a long-term relationship with a woman named Tanina Love Green. In 1986, they had a daughter. Her name was Crystal Love Carson. Crystal was Johnny Carson's one and only grandchild. But Johnny wanted nothing to do with her. Crystal was biracial, and Johnny Carson, the king of late night, refused to acknowledge his granddaughter. The story gets even sadder. Chris and Tanina split up. They ended up in a public court battle over child support. And this is where we find out more about Chris's life. The trial revealed that Chris worked as a golf instructor, but his primary financial support came from his famous father. Johnny Carson was paying for his son's life. He gave Chris $35,000 a year. That is on top of buying him cars and a home. So Johnny was financially supporting his son Chris, but he spitefully rejected his son's child. According to reports, Crystal tried to connect with her grandfather. She sent him loving homemade cards. She sent him letters and photos of herself as a little girl. She was hoping for any sort of acknowledgement. She got nothing. Johnny Carson refused all of it. He was determined to disavow any ties to his biracial grandchild. This was not neglect. This was an active choice. He was paying for his son's entire life, but he refused to even look at a picture of his own granddaughter. He rejected her completely. So after a lifetime of keeping his family at a distance, rejecting his own blood, who did he leave his $300 million to? The answer is the final shocking insult. Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005. He was 79 years old. He died from respiratory failure. His will was private. The details were not released to the public. But over time, the truth came out. And the truth was a final, cold message to his family. When Johnny died, he had a net worth of $300 million. His family did not get $300 million. They did not even get half. The vast majority of Johnny Carson's fortune, the single biggest piece of his estate, was given away. He left a bequest of $156 million to his foundation, the John W. Carson Foundation. The foundation was set up to support children, education, and health services. It gives money to groups in Los Angeles and in his home state of Nebraska. He also left $4 million directly to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. These are wonderful, generous gifts. $156 million is an incredible amount of money that has helped many, many people. But what about his family? His widow, Alexis Moss, and his two surviving sons, Chris and Corey, were left to split what was left over, after $156 million was given to his foundation. Imagine being his sons. You live your whole life in your father's shadow. You watch him give his love to strangers on TV. You suffer his coldness. You watch your brother die. You get one late apology. You watch your own child, his only grandchild, be completely rejected. And then, at the reading of the will, you find out the truth. The $300 million was never for you. More than half of it, $156 million, was given away. His final act was to prove what his sons already knew. His work, his legacy, and his public image were the most important things to him. Family was just too hard. Johnny Carson once said that none of that money made him happy. He said it was silly to have as one's sole object in life just making money. So what was the point of his $300 million? He told us. He said, "Money gives me just one big thing that's really important, and that's the freedom of not having to worry about money." In the end, he had all the freedom in the world. But his family was left with a $300 million question. What good is all that freedom if you end up all alone?